the Vancouver campus. All of our 9 locations downtown are on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, and the Squamish peoples. I want to thank you for joining us today for this very special 2-part Lunch and Learn series, where we will be looking at the future of the Central Waterfront area. And the key question being, what could or should the redevelopment of this area be? And to give you some clarity around the space we're talking about, we're going to show you a very brief video presented by 2 enterprising students from UBC's Masters of Community and Regional Planning at UBC, Jasmine Sangara. And Jasmine's academic interests are green network planning and active transportation, and her colleague, Katie Turf. And Katie's areas of interest are Indigenous governance and First Nations and municipal relations. So Katie and Jasmine, you can show your video now.
Great, so we will get started. Downtown Vancouver's Central Waterfront area is the heart of the city. Adjacent to the Central Business District, it is a gateway to Gastown and centers on Waterfront Station, connecting downtown Vancouver to the rest of the Metro Vancouver region. Views of the Burrard Inlet and the North Shore Mountains are some of the best in the region. Despite its spectacular geography, the Central Waterfront area is dominated by parking lots for cars and storage space for freight trains. The Downtown Waterfront Working Group, or DWWG, is a community group advocating for citizen engagement in the creation and implementation of revitalization plans for the waterfront. To support the DWWG, we, alongside a group of 13 excellent student researchers from UBC's School of Community and Regional Planning, Plan 522 Qualitative Research Methods course, sought to explore an equitable revitalization for this space. Students from downtown campuses emerged as the target research population as a result of an extensive literature review on waterfront development, governance, placemaking, and public participation. Students are often underrepresented in public visioning and design processes, but they encompass a range of identities and experiences, and they are often cast as transient members of the community despite their contributions to its vitality.
With this in mind, our research focused on the following research question. What options and evaluation criteria do students propose for downtown waterfronts revitalization and redevelopment? From the literature review, interviews, and a focus group, several key themes emerged relevant to the future revitalization of the Central Waterfront area. Our data indicates a desired future waterfront that emphasizes public space, includes food and cultural amenities, and incorporates open or green space while maintaining its transit functionality. Participants highlighted the importance of a future waterfront that is accessible and equitable. To highlight the responses of our research participants and their values and preferred design elements regarding the downtown waterfront revitalization and redevelopment, we have created a video. It was filmed in the building across the street from Waterfront Station. The voices you will hear are ours on the team, but the words, as I mentioned, are snippets of what we heard in our interviews with students who use the waterfront area. Alyssa, can we have you please play the video now?
I think about when my grandpa visited from Singapore. One time we brought him to Waterfront Station, to the seawall, and just gave him a tour of Gastown. He needs a place to sit down every now and then, and it's hard for him to enjoy sightseeing when there's not a lot of places for him to rest or take a break. Yeah, I'd say for my friends who I hung out with there who had children, I think seating is such a big issue in that area.
That Versace building or storefront that you see there is telling of what I think is representative of waterfront or the waterfront area.
I don't think I've ever been approached. Even people that I know, I don't think they've ever been approached about the Central Waterfront area process. You kind of hear about it in the news, but I don't think I've seen any opportunities for that. I don't think I've seen that many opportunities for younger people to be involved in the design process of the waterfront area.
Is this space going to be open to the public? Or is it going to be private? Yeah, I think if it doesn't really have that element of public use, I don't think myself or other students would be using it that often. I mean, if it's redeveloped and doesn't really include anything that myself or other students feel included in or would want to use.
Yeah, I would say there are viewpoints. Looking across the water is nice. It's a viewpoint. It's kind of the only thing you can see. To look across to North End and to see the mountains and that, you know, the parking lot. There is a place where you can do that, but it's a parking lot.
Katie and Jasmine, thank you very much. And I hope you'll stay with us for the rest of the presentation, and good luck with your continued studies at UBC. And now we want to show you an aerial map of the area we're talking about just before we introduce the speakers. So as you look at this aerial map of the central waterfront, you can see the boundaries as they're outlined in red. Alyssa, could you put up the map? Okay, maybe, oh, here we go. Now, as you can see, just for those of you unfamiliar with the area, it's bounded on the west by Canada Place and on the southeast corner by East Waterfront and the edge of the Vancouver Port. And that gives you a sense of the area that will be under discussion today. Thank you very much, Alyssa. Now just before we start introducing the format, I want to give a special welcome to the acting CEO of Translink, who's taken the time to join us today, Gigi Chen Kuo. Thank you for joining us. This gives us a sense of how important this area is to Translink. Now, to today's format, in order to give you, the audience here, as much time to ask questions as possible, the presenters have agreed in advance to speak for 5 minutes. And obviously, in the time we have available, we can't really do justice to all of the things they know about the area. And likewise, in my introductions, will be kept brief for that reason as well. If you want to learn more about any of our presenters today, please go online. And I want, again, to thank each of our presenters in advance here for taking the time to be with us today and contributing to SFU's community engagement. And so now let me introduce our first speaker, Larry Beasley. Larry is an internationally acclaimed consultant and an author and distinguished practice professor of planning at UBC. During Larry's tenure as the director of planning in Vancouver, the city's urban center was revitalized so successfully that the Vancouver model, or Vancouverism, became the standard to emulate in cities around the world. And Vancouverism is the title of Larry's 2018 book. Larry has advised cities and governments and around the globe, from Dallas to Rotterdam, from Abu Dhabi to Moscow. Larry sits on many boards, including Translink and the National Capital Commission. He's the recipient of the Order of Canada. He's an alumnus of SFU, both with his BA in geography and returning a few years later to receive his honorary doctorate for his contribution to city planning. He also has one from Dalhousie. Please join me in welcoming Larry Beasley. Over to you, Larry.
Great, thank you, Lori. And also thanks to the students for that intro. It was a very good intro, and thanks to SFU for bringing this issue forward. For my part today, I want to make just 3 main points. Point 1 is that the policy aspirations for this area have actually been quite clear and strong and consistent since way back in 1994, when we had a big public process involving thousands of people and concluded the Central Waterfront Portland's policy statement. I'm just going to read a few words from it. The western portion would become a preeminent civic destination on the waterfront with intensity, diversity, vibrancy, innovative architecture, memorable urban spaces, and a comfortable environment for walking. Extending and expanding downtown-related functions, particularly transportation and tourist activities. Sea bus, cruise ship terminal, heliport, convention and exhibition center, offices, hotel, retail, and very importantly, compatible housing and continuous public access along the waterfront. The eastern portion should be an attractive and comfortable place to go for neighborhood people, e.g. very much the downtown east side, with uses that are compatible with the park and neighborhood activity, unquote. Now, nothing happened in those years, primarily because there was no energy to make it happen. The lands were very tied up, but things have really changed now. Number one, the rail property is now privately owned by Greg Kerfoot. I think Greg is in the audience today. And this development is a huge opportunity for our whole city. Other development interest has been shown in the Ice Pick proposal, for example. The transportation hub, which is right in the middle of the area, managed by TransLink, is a major part of our transit system in Vancouver, and it needs to grow. That's my first point. My second point is my vision is still very close to that 1994 dream. To see downtown grow out to embrace the amenity of the water, those wonderful northerly views, and that fascinating working port. This is a 3D urban design puzzle, so I'm really looking forward to Norm's ideas today. I see two possible scenarios among many things, but scenario one, shift the whole footprint of the westerly tracks completely away from downtown to parallel Centerm, and then totally redevelop right across the whole downtown frontage. It was urban designer Lance Berwilowitz, and Lance is in the audience today, I see, that did the first drawing of this for me when I was co-director with Ann McAfee. And that opens up amazing possibilities scaled to the adjacent development high in the west, lower in the east, with lots of park space. Scenario two, if that's not possible, at least build over the tracks in the westerly side as a downtown extension, leaving the east as is perhaps, because we don't want to endanger Gastown. And that would at least give us a downtown link to the water. Both scenarios would make the transit hub the grand center of everything, a world model. That's why I'm so glad to see Sarah here today to tell us about that. And it would save the CPR station. We'd have continuous waterfront walkway and bikeway system that we dreamed about back in the 90s. We would do landmark architecture on the west side. And I could see how you could negotiate the Ice Pick development onto an adjacent site up on the water, opening up with Kerfoot, opening up that huge site, that parking lot as the grand entrance into this whole new area. I call it the Proud District because I think it could be the Proud for Vancouver. Point three, this needs a comprehensive planning process with the city in the leadership role and with full port collaboration. So I strongly support what the city is trying to do in that planning process to put forward. Until then, I say no ad hoc development. Random development will really throw away so many public opportunities. I say include massive involvement from the people of Vancouver, include a collaborative design process with the specific interests, the downtown community, the Gastown community, the downtown east side community, Mr. Kerfoot, TransLink, Cadillac Fairview. And I say no more secret and confidentiality agreements and limited inputs. And that should happen as soon as possible. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you very much, Larry, and also for the incredible time management skills. Thank you very, very much. Now to our second speaker, Sarah Ross. Sarah has held a number of key strategic planning roles at TransLink during her 17 years there. For the past few years, Sarah has been the Director of Systems Planning at TransLink, a position responsible for transit networks, for the multimodal planning and integration of transportation and land use in collaboration with the municipalities across the metro region, and for bus priority and accessibility planning for all forms of public transit. Prior to joining TransLink, Sarah was a researcher at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Sarah obtained her BA at McGill University and has successfully completed 2 graduate degrees, the first at University of Toronto and an MA from UBC School of Community and Regional Planning. Sarah, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction and for hosting this panel. I'm really pleased to be here on behalf of TransLink. You know, as Larry has noted, and as I think everyone knows, this central waterfront area is the key multimodal focal point of our regional transportation network. It's the convergence of multiple rail, road, marine, and air transportation modes, as well as significant walking and cycling. And TransLink has authority and involvement in many of these modes, but not all of them. And in terms of the public transit system, Waterfront is the busiest station in our system, with over 13 million annual boardings in 2019. But on a daily basis, this means over 100,000 people are moving through that station every day. And yes, because of COVID, those numbers are dramatically down right now. But we are still expecting 1 million more people to move to this region, for our ridership to return and continue to grow, and for Waterfront Station to remain the busiest, most significant, and most complex hub in the region. But the design of the station as it currently is certainly doesn't reflect that. Frankly, it's a patchwork and an awkward transferring experience, and it certainly doesn't feel like the quality of station that is warranted for a region known around the world as having one of the best transit systems and for being very transit oriented. And while TransLink is currently undertaking work to address some of the specific issues with the station, looking at upgrades to the fare gates, looking at what our specific West Coast Express needs are, there is no overall station upgrade project planned or funded at this time. But what would an exemplary transportation hub look like? Well, we would have a high quality public realm around the station, so it's easy, safe, and pleasant to access by walking or rolling or other modes. High quality accessibility within the station, seamless transfers, spacious concourse, highest levels of accessibility. We would have enhanced customer amenities and services, good signage, comfortable waiting areas, and, well, dare I say it, public bathrooms. And these ideas are not new. In fact, much of what I'm describing is well captured in the 2009 Central Waterfront Hub framework. But of course, implementing this is very complex. For starters, TransLink does not own the station building, which is a privately owned heritage building. And the governance and ownership in the area is very complex. And any significant changes or rebuilds would be technically complex. I think you got a capture of that through that great video. You can see so much going on there. It's an active railway. As I mentioned, 100,000 people moving through every day, critical transportation connections that have to be maintained. And the best solutions for the Waterfront Station and the area will depend on collaboration between the city and TransLink, the province, the port, and the key landowners in the area, and to implement a shared vision. And TransLink, we look forward to continuing to engage with our partners, those partners and the community on planning for the surrounding area and the eventual overall plan for improving the experience and function of Waterfront Station. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And now we'll move right on to our third speaker, and I'll just remind you of a couple of things just before I introduce Norm. One is we will be taking questions in two ways. Some you can put them in the chat box now, and then the others when we begin the questions in about 12 minutes from now. At that time, you can use the raise hand function. Again, the presenters have very kindly agreed to condense their time so we can use at least half of our time here today for your questions. And now to introduce Norm Hudson. Norm is an award-winning architect and the founding principal of Dialogue Design Studio in Vancouver. Norm's expertise includes master planning of major redevelopment initiatives in cities around the world, including waterfront projects in Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Locally, Norm was the coordinating architect for 30 years for the renewal of Granville Island, a project widely acclaimed for its creative transformation. Norm has served on many boards and committees, including the Vancouver Heritage Advisory, BC Artscape, and like Larry, a member of the National Capital Commission. Norm obtained an honors degree in architecture from University of Toronto, is a fellow at the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, and a recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Architectural Institute of BC. Please join me in welcoming Norm.
Thanks, Larry. Just to follow up on the previous two speakers who stole most of my ideas, but that's good. I want to just pose a number of issues that I think are pertinent to this particular site from a planning and design point of view, and then pose some questions that might be useful in the ongoing conversation. So I would start with the idea of the transportation hub. And is it transportation that drives this plan ultimately? And I suspect it may very well be, but let's not forget various other proposals or mandates that this particular site might have in terms of directing its future planning. The second issue that I think is critical is the proposed office tower adjacent the station. It's raised a number of concerns within the community, and I suspect that will continue to do so. But why not look at perhaps a relocation of this proposal and develop a wonderful new urban square on the existing parking lot that would become, as Larry posed, a gateway for the central waterfront. And could this space be the meeting place between visitors to our city and residents as this transition space between downtown core and the Gastown, Chinatown communities to the east? The third point is the rail yard and the potential relocation of that storage and shunting yard, which would do wonderful things in terms of opening up this site. Could it be either configured differently or located elsewhere? And then potentially, could the ground plane of any development on this site actually be lowered to grade, to real grade? And would this then allow for the potential extension of Gastown to the waterfront? The fourth point has to do with Port of Vancouver policy. I've done many studies of this particular waterfront for the port over the years. And there's a terrific potential for ferries, passenger ferries, water taxis, expanded cruise ship facilities and better connections, expanded sea bus, perhaps things like dinner cruise, whale watching, and so on. But what about some of the points that Larry raised? What about introducing on port lands tourist-related services, hotels, maybe major attractions of some sort, and then of course shops, restaurants, and even potentially residential, which currently does not fall under the category of a water-dependent use. Fifth point I would suggest is architecture. I think we're dealing with a wonderful historic building. We have a heritage precinct to the east in the form of Gastown. Is this a place where the downtown could transition into a mid-rise form of urban development? Could one trigger off a more contextual proposition in terms of architecture that would relate to the old station and indeed would relate to Gastown itself? Not unlike in some ways what Arthur Erickson did at Robson Square, where you take the tower and you lay it on its side and you develop a new kind of urban form. Sixth point is parking. Parking is what tends to drive most development. Could this be a test site for a no parking policy in Vancouver? We have wonderful transportation in this area. If possible, it would eliminate one of the most significant technical and aesthetic issues on this site. In my opinion, the last thing we need is a parking podium sitting atop railway tracks with the best views in Vancouver. Final point, and these are always challenges, and I've grouped them: sustainability, indigenization, and climate change. And how can this plan be built around these very important current imperatives? And I think that is a real challenge. So I hope those questions will add to the conversation. Thanks, Laurie.
Norm, thank you very much. And we'll move on to our final speaker today. Our last guest today is Gil Kelly. Gil is an internationally recognized urban strategist and visionary Most recently, Gil was the general manager of planning, urban design, and sustainability for the City of Vancouver. And previously, Gil has been the director of planning in 3 other large cities, Portland, San Francisco, and Berkeley. Gil has also been an independent advisor to cities and governments internationally, and as well as been appointed to the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Certified Planners for his contribution to the field. Gil received the APA Award for Innovative Planning and Community and Public Engagement. And Gil has been a Loeb Fellow at Harvard's Graduate School of Design and studied urban design and planning at MIT. Finally, Gil has served as a practitioner in residence at the Tulane School of Urban Studies and Planning at Portland State University. Please join me in welcoming Gil.
Well, thank you, Lori, and thank you to SFU for hosting this conversation today. And thanks again, as others have mentioned, to the students for really kicking off this latest round of inspirational thinking. I'll be brief, try to stay to my 5 minutes, but I wanted to just make a statement because I'm recently a former director of planning for the City of Vancouver, that while I have recent knowledge and I certainly have opinions, as the other panelists do, I'm not here today to represent any official city process or intent or policy. So just wanted to sort of make that clear to the participants today. Think of me as a more current version of Larry in that way. I wanted to begin, and I don't want this to sound like a down note because it really will end up very upbeat, but I do want to level set the conversation a bit, which is to put this in some perspective. There are many reasons not to do this now. And the reason I'm saying that is, unlike situations in San Francisco, for example, where the Loma Prieta earthquake really wobbled the Embarcadero Freeway, which led to a political decision to, rather than to rebuild it, to replace it with a surface level boulevard treatment, and really made a wonderful waterfront central in San Francisco. We don't have that cataclysmic event driving this, nor do we have the sort of obviously failing and congested situation that the Seattle Alaska Way Viaduct had, which together with community push really led to a decision to eliminate that and do something somewhat similar to what the San Francisco approach was. And here, in addition to that, the infrastructure challenges are enormous and costly to do this well, and very complex, as Norm has alluded to. And there is, other than setting aside Sarah's comments for the side, there's not a single party urgently demanding change right now. And I do think the TransLink piece is an interesting exception to that and worth pursuing. Nor is it top of mind, frankly, for current city council priorities in terms of the affordability crisis in housing, homelessness, although it does potentially overlap with the growing priority for this council with regard to diversifying the economy in Vancouver. And I only say that to tee up some of my 3 suggestions here, because despite all of that, I think this is really important to do for the city. And so I would concur with the others about that. And I would note that this is kind of a missing piece for Vancouver to really establish not only a multimodal transportation hub and a more active waterfront and to knit together the downtown, as people have said, but I think we need to picture it as the principal gateway to the city. And I would speculate the principal gateway, Western gateway to all of Canada. It's that significant and that important. So I think for that reason, beginning with a refresh of the vision that Larry and Norm have talked about is an important piece to proceed with now. I would just posit that, because without a long-term vision, I think we're bound to make those incremental small changes that end up getting in the way of accomplishing the larger goals. So my three suggestions, and I'll be quick here, Lori, are one, go bold with the vision, really go bold. And I think that many of the themes that were talked about in the 2009 plan are valid and should be re-energized. But I would say, in addition to that, I would kind of elbow out the geography a little bit and go all the way, not just to Crab Park on the east, but actually to the portlands that adjoin the Centrum, not take in the Centrum, but that have active fishing uses there, commercial, as well as some light industrial lands that could have some public participation and engagement, even as they continue their uses. And to the west, I would say there are water lots, even to the west of the current convention facility between the two pieces there that ought to be probably taken in. And again, as others have mentioned, really looking back into the town itself in terms of Gastown, Railtown, and the downtown. I would say also be bold in the sense that the city could benefit from broadening the focus, which is currently so much around the ice pick building, the waterfront station, the potential plaza there where the parking lot is, and really extending our view out about 400 meters to the north across the whole area there to really, as Norm was alluding to, extend a mid-rise development out and engage the water there, and actually maybe put principal plazas and open spaces out closer to the eventual waterfront there. So we're talking about a very long-term plan. But I'd say my second suggestion would be to really kind of dial in on, elucidate the potential drivers and motivations here, in addition to, of course, to the public aspirations for this and the public engagement, which is critical and was in those other cities I mentioned. Think about the potential drivers here. So the TransLink piece is one, needing some fairly immediate improvements there to the station area. But think about some other pieces. For example, in the US, the Biden administration has announced and is working hard through Congress now to get a major infrastructure package passed. And one of the components of that is to focus on high-speed regional rail. And after the Washington-Boston corridor, the next one kind of being talked about most frequently is the Cascadia corridor, linking Vancouver with Seattle and Portland. So the notion of that potentially extending here past the current station in the flats to this hub is another, as well as all the other transportation connections to the North Shore that others have alluded to. Think too about recovering from COVID and the need for Vancouver to actually expand its convention facility. It is now currently, I believe, the most subscribed convention facility in all of North America. And there's demand for more, as I see it, post-COVID. And the need for hotels and other facilities that go with that, and other entertainment facilities. Many of those could be within the mission of the port properties as well, the ones more directly here to the west. So I think that's another potential driver. And one other one I wanted to mention in terms of potential motivations and drivers is, and this wasn't so apparent in earlier planning, sea level rise. The current rail yards, the N yards, as they're spoken about, is already subject to flooding during king tide and storm surge. That is only going to increase in the coming years, in the coming decades. So something major will need to be done there. And in my mind, that opens up a need for at least a medium term, if not an immediate, look at the potential to either shore that up with a large dike or to look at relocating those storage facilities, which opens up all kinds of possibilities that Norm was alluding to. So focusing really on these motivations and potential drivers, I think is really important, because we can have a great vision, but if we don't sort of muscle up to these huge cost and infrastructure challenges, it won't be realized. And my third point here is, in order to harness all of that, it's such not only a thicket of infrastructure complexity, but of jurisdictional complexity. There are federal, provincial, regional, and local governments, all with a different role here to play. And so my suggestion here is actually to think about forming an intergovernmental compact that is specific to the Central Waterfront in Vancouver because of its regional and frankly national significance, where there's a new governance structure created for participating agencies that have a stake in this game to actually coordinate investment and make it happen over time. The city's role is not as a landowner, it's primarily as a policymaker and regulator, but the others all have enormous financial stake in this, including some of the federal office buildings adjacent to this in the downtown. So I just think something very special here needs to happen to ensure that coordination and investment over time. And frankly, the leverage potential coming out of something like that for additional federal transportation funds or other is enormously improved by having that kind of special structure. It's unusual, but I think the circumstances here are so unusual it probably warrants that. So that's my final and third suggestion. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Gil. And now to the questions. We are moving, first of all, to what is called spotlight function, where the people you will see on the screen now are the presenters and myself as a moderator. We do have, as I said, both the chat function for putting in your questions and also raising your hands. Given we've got 140 people here today, my eyes can't scan all the boxes fast enough. So probably the chat is your most likely opportunity to have your questions. And again, the questions may be answered by one or more of the panelists. So let's start with a relatively straightforward question. If any of the panel know this, this is from a stranger called Gord Price. Is there any transport system hub in the world with more modes of transportation than this particular site? Anyone want to try that one?
Well, Larry, you and I are both world travelers here. I really don't know of one that is comparable, particularly in a waterfront location. There are some that come somewhat close, but this one, there is just so much converging here, as Sarah mentioned, of different modes of transportation and potentially in the future even others, that I think this is a unique or at least an outstanding example of what we could achieve here. Larry, I don't know if you...
There's other examples. Sydney has an interesting transportation node as well, but this is better. This is more complex. This is more complete. Sarah probably has done the best review of this, probably of any of us on this panel, but I can tell you, this is essential to the transportation of this region.
Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of one that has more modes, but I also, so it is, I agree with Gil and Larry, but I also want to say we're not the only people who have a very complex situation on our hands. And, you know, we can learn from other organized cities on how they've solved maybe not the exact same situation, but, you know, the idea of there being a whole bunch of different things happening with complex governance structures and needing massive infrastructure investment is certainly not unique in the world of planning and development.
Okay. Thank you. I'll take another question and then we'll continue. This is, I think, a rhetorical one from John. Why shouldn't Waterfront Station be in public ownership, given that it could be, as some of you have suggested, magnificent galleria that welcomes visitors and has all the other amenities we talked about? Any question about that? Given the importance of this, should this be a public commodity? Any response to that?
Well, I'll start on that one. Ultimately, I think it is essential that we secure the public access for that transportation functionality. And it needs to be a lot more secure than it is now. Now that might be ownership, that might be some form of long-term lease, it might be some special arrangement or accord, but it does need to be a lot more secure than it is now. And I would argue that as a part of any comprehensive planning process, that would be one of the motivations. So this is not a temporary tenant on this site. This is as permanent as anything else on the site or as anything else in the city.
Any other comments, anyone?
I would agree with Larry. I would just say that it's currently owned by a private party who has, has an interest there in developing as well. So I think it would have to be something negotiated through the process. But I think the statement of intent that Larry just noted, I'm sure Sarah would agree with, is probably a good piece to advance in that negotiation and that policy making.
Right, thank you. A question there from Andy. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to speak with us. I'm struck by the fact that there are no Black, Indigenous, or people of color on this panel. Why have BIPOC voices been excluded from this conversation so far? And what is the vision to elevate BIPOC voices in traditional planning processes? We would like to start with that one.
Well, I'm not gonna, I think the person who has to start with that one isn't here with us today, and that's the city and the port, who are actually the custodians and hosts of this public process. And I would argue that yes, they need to, all interests need to be represented, and interests who have not been represented historically need to be given emphasis. And I would argue that goes for Indigenous and First Nations interests as well. That goes for the interests of the downtown east side, which tends to be forgotten in this, and it also goes for the interests of Gastown. So yes, that needs to happen. Right now, the process, and I'm going to say this publicly, and I'm going to make enemies when I say this, the process is not public enough. The officials involved have signed non-disclosure agreements, so it means they can't even relate and deal with people. We haven't seen a public process. We haven't seen the opportunity for every citizen to weigh in on what's going on here. And that really does have to change. This has to be an open process. It has to involve thousands of our citizens, and it has to involve our marginalized citizens in a very, very special process.
Any other comments on this one?
Lori, when you imagine the long list of stakeholders that are affected by this property or involved in this property, I suspect it's possibly the most complex planning area we've ever seen in Vancouver. And it's going to be challenging. And I think some of the suggestions that Gil and Larry have made are terribly important in terms of moving forward with this.
We did do this before. We have done this before. We found an accord between the port and the city to open the conversation to all of our citizens. So it's not like it's a new thing or particularly a difficult thing. It's not even that innovative. It's actually the tradition of our city.
Gil, I think you wanted to say something here.
Well, just to echo Larry's point, but to put a little an extra note on it, I think the city did do an outreach and then went into a period of technical study together with the port. My hope, and again, I can't speak for the city, is that now will become a public process again, more broadly, to engage people potentially around principles for this urban design visioning, and ultimately for the visioning process. I think that is what's needed here, and my hope is that the city will be in a position to do that in this coming year, having gone through a period of joint technical study work with the port. And I know that Sarah has done additional studies, and there are other transportation studies going on simultaneously around rail and regional connections that will help inform the public work going forward. So in my view, it's sort of a matter of time.
I'm sorry the city's not here today.
Yeah.
Lori,
Yes, please, go ahead, Sarah.
I just might also circle kind of back to the original question about diversity of voices. And I appreciate the question. And I think that, in the discipline of planning and transportation, we do need to work to build up and support Black, Indigenous, and people of color so that they also have voices at tables like this. That's a focus of that we all collectively need to work on together. So I appreciate that being called out in the question. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We have a question now from Florence. This is a question about proximity. How will this project affect the downtown east side and Chinatown in terms of the plan at the moment, in terms of the issue of gentrification, through the lens of gentrification for the downtown east side and Chinatown? Who would like to try that one?
Well, I would say the benefit of what we're talking about here is improving access to the waterfront for residents of all incomes and all household types from downtown East Side out to the waterfront and to the facilities there that are truly public in nature. The gentrification piece is a citywide issue, and so whenever we have a robust amount of market development, it continues to put pressure on displacement pressure. I don't think that's unique to this situation, but it's something to be mindful of in terms of doubling down on some of the efforts around affordable housing in the downtown East Side. So I see them as being parallel efforts that would be needed.
Okay, and I should point out there's a number of questions around the city's role, and we've spoken of that. The city declined coming today because of the fact there is an application under process, and given that was in process, they felt it was at this point not the right time to be involved in this. So just in the interest of letting people know that. The port is a large player in this, given their location and given it represents the federal government. And one of the questions here is from Chris to all of you. It's pointed to Larry, but to anyone, how would you suggest the city gets the port to the table, so to speak?
Well, the good thing about the city process so far is that it is a collaboration between the city and the port. They have been doing it jointly. And I think this port is beginning to learn more and more about that their interests are served by this collaboration. Judy Rogers is the chair of the port board. And I think Judy understands fully, as the former city manager of Vancouver, the involvement of everyone. So I'm actually pretty optimistic about the port's involvement. Now, they have a lot of technical issues that are hard for other people to understand, movement of dangerous goods, et cetera, et cetera. And so they really do have to be at the center of the action to really make things work. But one thing has changed, and that is that the port now is looking for more utility from its lands than it has been looking for the last 25 years. And that means their interests are to participate. So that's why I'm pretty optimistic.
Any other comments on that question?
No, I would echo that. I think there is that awareness now at the port that the futures here are mixed and blended, and they need to mutually support one another. So.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Hong, and this is about, here the question is, what are the opportunities for private landowners around the waterfront station and the owner of the station to join in some form of public-private partnership to achieve the ideal waterfront plan? You've kind of, some of you have spoken indirectly about that, but any follow-up on that question?
Well, I would say there's, no one else is speaking. I would say there's huge opportunity. Gil has already talked about the various kinds of formats that are out there. Norm knows probably more than all of us of different governance arrangements. I have a feeling that the landowners are very in favor of participation. When I've been talking to various landowners, I think every landowner would prefer to see a collaborative effort rather than independent here and there and everywhere and face all the opposition that comes with that. So there's a lot of interest for people pulling together, but I think the city has to be the agent for that. The city has to say, we are the city, come join us in this joyful process of re-envisioning this area to create what I call the proud district.
Mm-hmm. I'll open that up to anyone else. Oh, right. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I would agree. I think the property owners, from my involvement anywhere, are quite interested in what that process will be. I don't think it's a matter of convincing them to come to the table. I think they would come easily to the table. Each has different needs, but I think jointly participating in a bigger vision that meets a whole bunch of different interests and needs as part of that, with some ability to flex from their starting points. I think that's the magic of the process here. And I see that as a huge opportunity.
Thank you, Gil.
And
Here's a question. Sure, go ahead, Norm. Yes, please.
Sorry, just to further that, so often planning starts with some individual proposal, whether it's a building or a transit system or what have you. And, in this case, it's so important that we not take a knee-jerk reaction to something that happens to be on the table,
Yeah.
and really take the comprehensive view that Gil just referenced.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I would add that, TransLink, very much it would welcome opportunities to enter into partnership agreements where we can work in finding ways to revitalize the area, invest in the station, and improve the transportation infrastructure as well. But I think per the point Gil made earlier on, and just to reemphasize what Norm said, we need to do that in the context of that, clear vision and knowing where we're all working together and not in ad hoc ways, which is where we got to where we are today, right? That kind of patchwork.
Thank you, Sarah. We have a question from Frank. It seems that the future of the rail yards is a key aspect of planning for the area, something that a number of you have commented on. Will the future development be at grade level or at a platform similar to Hudson Yards? I believe that's the New York example. Who would like to try that one?
Well, my sense is that there are a couple of options there. One is we have to contend with sea level rise and with the storage of potentially dangerous or hazardous materials with regard to the rails. So, one version would be to build over the existing rails and sort of protect them from the sea level rise by an external barrier. That presents some issues on its own. And one of the reasons I think this needs to be a full exploration of alternatives, including potentially ultimate relocation of those storage yards. That would open up the option of stepping down, as I think Norm said, closer to the water level. We'd have to determine an adequate future sea rise level, which is above that current grade, where you would achieve that step down after this first block. But you've got another couple blocks going west here to develop, where you really could have a wonderful meeting with the waterfront, whether that's elevated slightly or whether it eventually meets grade, particularly going to the east toward Crab Park. The access to the water and revitalization of that waterfront with new interesting facilities and plazas and open spaces is enormous. So I think the relocation of the rails opens up huge future possibilities, but they are of use right now, and in the near term are needed by the port. There's no question. So that's a big challenge to sort through.
Well, I'll add to that. Number one, there is a scheme to relocate the whole footprint, as I mentioned at the beginning, and it's a fascinating scheme. It needs a lot of technical evaluation. Number two, there has been a lot of analysis already to show that you can develop, if that is not possible, you can still develop over the tracks. There's a lot of excess trackage there given modern uses that are not necessary. Number three, this is really a three-dimensional urban design problem. It's not going to be solved by any one landowner or any one authority. That's why they have to really work together. The private interests have certain rights, the public has certain rights, and they have to come together to get a really good scheme. And what makes that urgent is back to the transportation hub, because the transportation hub is the one that has to slide in there at the very right elevation. So it's actually one of the best urban design problems I've ever seen.
Yeah.
We're coming near to the end, but we've got time perhaps for one or two more questions. Here is a question from John. What level of government should lead a combined effort to deal with this? Why not the feds, who have a huge interest in re-energizing the economy through public investment? What about that one?
Well, I'm just going to give you a philosophic view. I've always felt that your local government is the one that is first and foremost responsible for what happens on local space. Having said that, yes, I think the feds and through the port, particularly because the port is the agent really of their interests. I think TransLink and the province, others as well. But I've always felt that the city should plan the city, not have it planned by authorities in Ottawa or by a development interest in Hong Kong or anything else.
My twist on that would be back to my third suggestion at the opening is I think the city is in a good position to lead that visioning effort. What is the overall plan with the partners in the port? Excuse me, with the port and with TransLink and Pavco and others. Clearly, I would agree with Larry on that. But I do think to execute that vision, we need a special compact that involves the federal government, the province, in various roles of the province, TransLink, and all the other agencies that are going to have to execute and invest here. There has to be a special compact to drive that. Otherwise, it won't happen. You'll have a bunch of moving parts, fits and starts. And so I guess I would just reinforce that point.
Thank you. I'll move to the last question. Maybe each of the presenters may want to make a comment related to this or any other thing, because this may be your closing comment as well. This question is from Helen. As a city of reconciliation, it's disappointing that there has been little mention of discussing engagement with the nations. Water and access to it, such an important aspect of the nation's culture, given, again, the location. There is so much potential for this important waterfront site, particularly given its proximity to the downtown east side and centrality. I wonder if you would like to, this would be your last question, and I wonder if there's any, who would like to start responding to that around the role of nations in the area.
I might start there, and others should join in. The city is now increasingly not only aware of, but motivated to engage the First Nations in all kinds of planning, including the citywide plan and other efforts. I think that's really changed over the last few years. And so I think the time is right to do that. I think there's an interest on the part of the planning entity in the city. And again, I can't speak officially for them, to engage the First Nations more directly in this effort. And I think the opportunity coming forward to begin to engage people around what should be the principles for the design and investment here. Clearly, there ought to be some kind of principle around deep and real engagement with the host nations.
I would even go further. I think it has to go beyond just engagement. I think it has to go beyond just those superficial things we've seen. The fact is that the First Nations in this region have a corporate arrangement now, MST developments, where they can actually participate as true investment partners. And so the opportunity is there to bring all the First Nations interests and meld those with the interests of all other Vancouverites and all other Canadians together. And there's an obligation to do it because this does involve federal land. So all of those things are working in the right direction. I agree with Gil. There's a philosophical predisposition, I think, among everyone to want to do that. But here we have something more than I've seen elsewhere in Canada. We have the corporate ability to do that because the First Nations have themselves organized to be leaders, and that's a very good thing.
I would agree. And what I meant by deeper engagement was just that there are now structures that the host nations have that we can engage in a more profound action-oriented level.
Okay. Any other comments? I know, Sarah, you referred to this earlier. Any other comments at this point as we close? So.
Well, I would just close by saying this is all about bringing people together to work together.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a fitting end to the presentation. So let me close with some thank yous and an invitation. First of all, I want to thank Katie and Jasmine, our students from the School of Community and Regional Planning, for getting us started. This is an example of what engagement's like, so I'm glad you were here to see it. To our presenters, Larry, Sarah, Norm, and Gil, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And thank you to my colleagues at SFU Vancouver's admin office, Kelsey, Alyssa, Claudia, and Sophie. They do all the work to make this happen. And thanks to all of you, we had 140 people sign up today to take part in this, which shows you how much interest there is in this really critically important area of the city. I want to extend an invitation to you to join us again 2 weeks from today on April the 29th, same time, when we'll have 4 more experts join us to talk about the same topic. So again, to our presenters and to all of you who came along today, thank you so much for your time. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.